So, I'll just go ahead and welcome everybody to our Housing Element Update virtual community workshop. Glad you joined us this evening. If we could go to the next slide. So today we're going to we'll do some team introductions for everybody that'll be talking to you tonight. Go through the brief agenda that we have, and then through the presentation and a little bit of discussion, which will consist of the panelists responding to questions and comments that we received prior to the webinar starting. If you can go next slide, please. So we'll start with me. My name's Kerry Kushak. I'm the Director of Community Development for the City of La Mesa. And with me tonight is Allison Kennard. She's a Senior Planner with the City of La Mesa. And also with us this evening are Veronica Tam and Holly Anderson of Veronica Tam and Associates. And they are the consultant team that's preparing our Housing Element Update. Can I have the next slide, please? So the agenda is quickly going to run through, what's the housing element requirements, where La Mesa sits today, what the process for the housing element is. Got a few poll questions that we'd like your input on, and then we'll go through those questions and comments that we received prior to the webinar beginning. So with that, I will turn it over to Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam and Associates. To give the presentation. Thank you, Veronica.
Great, thank you. Now I'm just going to give a really general overview of what is the housing element, why we're doing it right now. Now, the housing element is part of your general plan. It's one of the 7 requirements of the general plan. It provides a general assessment of the city's housing needs and what's the best way to accommodate those needs, especially for the existing residents, but also for the future residents as well. The housing element also sets as citywide goals, objectives, and policies for the housing, identify housing conditions and needs within the community and how we're going to address those needs. Now, the housing element is a little bit different from the rest of the general plan in that it's the only element of the general plan that has to be updated more frequently and specifically 8 years and according to a statutory deadline. The rest of the general plan are not subject to that kind of requirements. In the San Diego region, the 8-year cycle that we're talking about, it's from April 15, 2021 to April 15, 2029. So we are working towards that deadline to update the housing element. It does have a grace period of 120 days, but to the extent that we can, we try to do it within the statutory deadline. The other things that is also sets the housing element apart from the rest of the general plan is that it's the only element of the general plan that has to undergo really rigorous review by a state agency. The State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, is the agency that is responsible for reviewing the housing element, make sure that it complies with state law. The housing element is probably also the most regulated element of the general plan. One of the some of the key requirements, and we'll go into a little bit more detail later on, is to accommodate the projected housing needs in the community as set by the regional housing needs allocation or regional housing needs assessment. We'll talk a little bit more in details about that because it's almost a key component of the housing element. The housing element also needs to address the increase in housing production to meet this particular assessment, to preserve existing affordable housing, recognizing that it's very expensive to build affordable housing, so preserving what you currently have is important to not only the community, but also to the state. Improve the quality of existing housing stock. Again, it's expensive to build new housing, so preserving and enhancing the quality of your existing housing stock is important. The state law also recognizes that building affordable housing is it's important, while the housing element has to address all income levels, but it does have a focus on low and moderate income households and those with special needs. The special needs populations are the elderly, the disabled, households that are large of 5 or more members, the homeless, female-headed households, and also farm workers. And lastly, the housing element needs to promote fair housing choice. Equal opportunity to housing is important. It's an important state and local housing goal. One of the key components of the housing element is this concept of regional housing needs assessment. Virtually no housing element would comply with state law, would be deemed compliant with state law if they are not able to meet the regional housing needs assessment. The regional housing needs assessment is a top-down planning process to some extent, and then it does have some local input into it. But essentially, the state Department of Finance would estimate how much housing is needed for the entire state of California, and the state would then allocate it to the sub-region, to the regions in the state. Each region would get an allocation from the state. And for the region from San Diego, you have its own region, it's San Diego Council of Area Council of Governments, and CENDAG. CENDAG is responsible for taking the allocation from HCD and allocating it among all the jurisdictions within the San Diego County. For the 6th cycle update that we're talking about, like I mentioned before, April 15, 2021 to April 15, 2029, you have an allocation county-wide for 171,685 units. CENDAG is responsible for allocating it for each jurisdiction. And if you compare the slides that we're talking about, the numbers that we're talking about, the city of La Mesa has a regional housing needs allocation of 3,800. So it's more comparable to the regional neighbors like California and Vista, but it's certainly much more less, and one of the factors that go into what are the high-resource areas in the region, schools, what are the economic opportunities, what the jobs are, where the location of residential areas.
Veronica, if I could, we're experiencing some breakup, I think. Yeah, you're breaking up a bit.
Okay. I was hearing some background in my headset, so I'm not sure whether I was whether people was able to hear me before.
Yeah, we had about a minute or so where you were breaking up. So if you could back up just a little bit, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Veronica.
Okay. So do I need to back up and talk about the regional housing needs allocation? Or you guys, everybody was okay?
I think what I recall is you were just saying how many units La Mesa was allocated when you started breaking.
Okay, great. Then okay, then that's fine. Generally, the regional housing needs allocation is allocated based on a lot of factors. It's complex kind of model that CENDAG uses, but it does look at where jobs and housing are currently located, where are the areas of high resources, consider high resources, where there are jobs, where there are better schools, where there are less environmental hazards. So a lot of factors go into the allocation of the regional housing needs allocation. What does that mean to have a regional housing needs allocation assessment? In looking at La Mesa, your RHNA for last round in the 5th cycle was about 1,722 units. This round is about 3,797 units. And it's divided into income categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. Very low incomes are those who make about 50% of the area median income. Low is about 80%, moderate at 120%, and above moderate income are people who make above that. Part of the reason why there is a higher number this round is because The last one when the housing element was updated, it was during a recession. And now we are actually at the peak of the market. That's part of the reason why we are having a higher number this time. And the fact that the state recognizes that we have a severe housing crisis, and therefore the overall projection for housing needs is much higher. When you have a regional housing needs allocation, we have to look at it from the perspective of, are you able to meet it by providing sites that are adequately zoned, appropriately zoned, so that housing can occur. It is not an obligation to build the units. It's an obligation to plan for the unit, that you must make sure that you have the capacity locally to accommodate the regional housing needs allocation. So for the city of La Mesa, the way we're looking at it currently, that the city has some pipeline projects. About 700 of those units are pipeline projects. There are also accessory dwelling units. The city has a pretty good trend, very healthy trend of accessory dwelling units in the last few years due to changes in state law. We are allowed to, in fact, we are required to encourage accessory dwelling units in the community, and therefore also be able to take advantage of those units being credited against the RHNA. The city has some expected projects that are coming in that we would add up to quite a bit of housing units in the next 8 years or so. And then we have housing sites that's available where developers can come in and build housing. So generally, the city of La Mesa doesn't think that we have an issue with accommodating the RHNA. We have enough sites at the right capacity to do that. So there is not any rezoning and upzoning that's at this time projected or proposed as part of the housing element update. And now Allison is going to talk a little bit about some of the current projects and pipeline projects. Allison?
Absolutely. Thank you, Veronica. The city has a number of projects that are at all stages of application, review, entitlement, and construction. So I'm going to highlight a little bit of those, a few of those housing projects right now, so you can kind of see what's happening now and then what's on the horizon. So if you look at this slide, moving from kind of counterclockwise from top right around, the first project there, that's 29-unit apartment project with mixed use. It's on El Cajon Boulevard. It includes 3 affordable units. It's not yet under construction, but it's fully entitled. So it's one that we know is coming. The second project there on the top left is located on University Avenue in the Village. That's a 10-unit project, and it has 1 affordable unit, and that's entitled and should be moving to construction fairly soon. On the bottom left, on Keeney Street, that's at the very north end of Keeney Street, almost to where overlooking I-8. That project is under review right now. That will provide 3 very low income affordable units. And then on the bottom right is the large project across the street from City Hall at 4949 Baltimore Drive. That's called the Jefferson La Mesa project. It's under construction, 230 apartments. It's a mixed use project and will have 10 very low income affordable. So that's located in the Village as well. Our next slide has a few more. All right, so these are 3 more exciting projects. The top 2 projects, the one on University Avenue, which was recently entitled just this month. It's for 60 condominiums, so that's going to be an owner-occupied project, which is a little more unusual in this current climate. Most of the multifamily development that we're seeing is apartments. This is a townhouse type development. It's located on the south side of University in between Parks Avenue and Dale. The 4210 Spring Street project is residential. It's 1 apartment building, 4 stories. It was also recently entitled just this month, and it's located down at the south end of Spring Street near the junction with State Route 94 and State Route 125. And then finally there on the bottom is Little Flower Haven. That's located just east of the Village on La Mesa Boulevard, and it's a 130-unit redevelopment project that is nearing completion and is expected to be occupied fairly soon. That was one of our earlier affordable housing projects under affordable density bonus state law, and will provide 13 low-income units. So you can see we have a lot going on right now. We have a lot entitled that we're waiting for construction to start, and we've got more on the horizon. Actually, this is just a sampling of some of the many projects we have in progress.
Okay, with that now we'll pass it on to Holly. She's going to give a little bit of an overview of La Mesa today with the demographic and housing conditions. Holly?
Yeah, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so overall, La Mesa population is around 59,562 people as of January of this year. And actually, there are a high number of single-person households in the city. And that could be people such as students living alone and also seniors living alone, which is actually a pretty high number for most of the county, is actually a lot lower than that percentage-wise. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. We'll just so housing tenure has actually stayed the same since 2010. Most of the city is predominantly renter occupied, and that is actually very common with the rest of the county. And among total households, most are families, but there are a substantial number of non-families, which means single persons living alone, and that could mean, again, students and seniors, or also people who live with roommates. So people trying to share the cost burden of renting or owning a home. Next slide. And among all income categories in La Mesa, more than half are actually moderate or above moderate income. And these income categories are defined by the state, and they're based off of the percentage of area median income in the county. And housing is actually considered to be affordable if occupants they pay no more than 30% of their income on housing costs. So we're trying to see what percentage of households in La Mesa could possibly have a housing cost burden. Next slide. So in La Mesa, there could be two possible housing problems that we're going to look at. One is affordability, and that again is, are households spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs? And currently in La Mesa, around 47% of all households, both renter and owner, could possibly be cost burdened. And then also we want to look at overcrowding, and that might not necessarily be a huge problem in La Mesa because only about 4% of households are considered overcrowded, so more than one person per room. And that can change with the rental market. Next slide. So now the process of the housing element, right now we are conducting community outreach, and we're trying to get input from the community's residents and stakeholders. And we are in the process of preparing the draft housing element. Some of the data that I just went over will be included in the housing needs assessment. We also have a lot of other data points which we'll be adding as well. And we're looking at also constraints and resources that the city may encounter over the next 8 years. And we're trying to develop goals, policies, and objectives that the city would like to reach at the end of the housing element period. We are going to review the draft housing element with the community at the Planning Commission, and that is hopefully taking place in the winter of 2020. And then we're also going to then submit the draft housing element to state for review and hopefully get approval before March 2021, and then get the housing element adopted. Go ahead,
So
next slide.
with that, that is our presentation. I think now we have a few poll questions to ask our participants. Allison is going to launch the poll.
Oh, that's not them. So I think that's the incorrect poll questions, Allison, unfortunately.
That was the test one.
Yes.
Yeah. What is your favorite color?
So Allison, yeah, we should pull that back and see if we can get the housing element questions pulled together.
Okay. Do we have a list of them? And I can share
We
them on the
do.
screen.
Yes, and you can, we can actually add them ad hoc in a poll, Allison. You'd be able to do that if you, since you have the control.
Okay.
Well, I think probably at this time it's a little bit difficult to do that. Yeah.
I think so.
So
We
what I'd say is, go ahead, Veronica.
go ahead, and Carrie, you can go ahead and facilitate the discussions on the questions and answers. I'm going to stop sharing. I may be able to do the poll, set up the poll. Let me see if I'm able to set up the poll, and then we can do the poll afterward.
Okay, that
That's
sounds
a great
good.
idea.
Yeah.
Good idea.
All right.
All right.
So, Allison, do you want to go ahead and, I'll just introduce this. We did receive several comments and questions prior to yesterday that and as we said, we'll address those here in our webinar tonight. So, Allison, if you wouldn't mind reading the questions, and then one of the panelists will address it.
All right, absolutely. All right, so thank you to everyone for providing questions, because we received a number of questions and we appreciated that. The first question is, what is the density of projects actually getting built as compared to the allowable density of project sites? It seems that the densities allowed may not be economically feasible, and therefore what is allowed in the general plan is not actually getting built on the ground. It would be good to see a general plan that has densities more in line with what is feasible, so we can be sure the number of units likely to get developed actually accomplishes the housing goals. Carrie.
Thank you, Allison. The city does want to assure that we have allowable densities and development standards that create an environment in which development is economically feasible. Generally, the projects that we've seen over the past several years are proposed at or near the maximum density. And actually, many projects have utilized the Affordable Homes Bonus Program, which implements the state density bonus law, and actually exceed the typically allowed maximum density for those projects through that law. And generally, the city's seen a brisk pace of development over the past several years. And that's continuing today, and suggesting that the folks who are building, and in general, the folks who are home builders, are finding La Mesa an economically feasible area to pursue housing development.
Thank you. The next question is, what made you decide that it's time to update the general plan housing element now? And I'll take that one. All of the jurisdictions in San Diego County are currently in the process of updating their housing elements for the 2021 through 2029 Regional Housing Needs Assessment Cycle, the RHNA cycle. Each jurisdiction has to demonstrate to the state how they'll meet their housing obligations that are identified in the RHNA. Okay, the next question is, La Mesa should focus more on helping increase the amount of affordable housing in the city and less on the high-end market rate housing, like new apartment complexes being built on Baltimore, south of I-8, and in other areas of the city. The most useful way to do this would be for city staff to send out the current housing element language in its general plan and any proposed edits or new language staff believes should be added to it. That would give the public something to respond to.
And Allison, you want me to answer that one, I assume. Well, we will have a draft housing element available for the public to review. As you saw earlier in the PowerPoint presentation, that we do have a meeting before either City Council or Planning Commission to present the draft housing element, and it will be available ahead of time for everybody to review and provide comments. And even as the housing element has gone on to the state, the residents can have continue to have the opportunity to comment on the housing element. The other thing regarding focus on affordable housing, the city obviously has no control over the market, and the RHNA is not necessarily a production requirement. However, the housing element will have some incentives and programs and actions that the city is going to undertake in order to foster or encourage affordable housing. The city does have a little bit of resources, financial resources, but without the redevelopment, that particularly ability to subsidize affordable housing construction is difficult, but the city has been able to get affordable housing in a lot of the new projects and through like either negotiation or just, incentive.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is for you also, Veronica.
Okay. You want me to just go over that quickly, or you want to read the question?
Yes, I'll read you the question.
Okay.
Several housing bills passed in the legislature over the last few years locked the state into incorrect data. Something to keep in mind as we address the latest RHNA cycle goals for individual cities. Those errors are expected to be corrected in new legislation next session.
Okay. This particular question was relating, I think it was referring to a study that's been circulating out there. Essentially, that study references two bills, one passed in 2017 and one passed in 2018, dealing with overcrowding and cost burden. Because of the timing, the two of them, the two bills do have overlapping, double counting existing housing needs. However, because of the timing of the San Diego region and its housing element when it's due, the county of San Diego or the San Diego region is only subject to the 2017 bill, not the 2018. So you're only subject to overcrowding and not the cost burden. So the double counting issue is present in other regions, but not in San Diego. And that's part of the reason why when you look at your regional housing needs allocation, and county-wise 171,000 units, if you look at the SCAG region, it's 1.34 million units. And so the double counting is severe in other regions, but currently not in the San Diego region. If there are any kind of corrections, it would not affect any of the RHNA that's already been allocated to jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next series of questions are all kind of similar. So I'm going to group them together, and then I think Carrie will provide a response to them all kind of as one. So the first question here is, I wanted to submit a comment on what I would like to see prioritized in the program. Require new buildings in La Mesa to be all electric. This will help the city achieve its climate action plan goals and enable us to achieve 100% clean power by 2035. Air quality has been a huge priority for me, especially this year with the pandemic, and all electric is necessary to improve our indoor air quality and health. For all new multifamily developments, ensure there are facilities included in the design to make it easy for residents to compost organic food waste. I live in a multifamily development. I have no ability to compost on my own. Our food waste is a major source of waste in our landfills and a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. I used to compost before I lived in the city of La Mesa, and I would love the city to prioritize incentives and programs for multifamily developments. For new multifamily housing developments in transit priority areas, there are a few elements we should prioritize. We should remove parking lot minimum mandates, consider parking spot maximum mandates, require electric charging stations for any parking spots that are provided, unbundle the cost of any parking spots that are provided from the cost of the housing unit, and ensure ample bicycle lockers are provided within the development. I have an electric vehicle and I cannot charge in my apartment building. This very much discourages residents to go electric for their next vehicle. For multifamily developments, ensure that trees are part of the development and that these trees are drought-tolerant shade trees. So that was from one respondent. And then the next comment is, I am a resident of La Mesa and would like to urge the Planning Commission to update its housing regulations so that all new buildings are all electric. This will help La Mesa achieve its goals set forward both in its climate action plan and with state guidelines requiring reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. I would also like to see the adoption of other climate-friendly policies, such as removing minimum parking mandates and unbundling the cost of parking spots with housing units. And then the next question is, Will the housing element include policies and/or incentives to encourage the development of high-density mixed-use or residential projects in transit priority areas within 0.5 miles of a trolley station or a transit hub? And then the next question is, will the housing element include priorities, strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from new residential construction projects consistent with the goals and objectives of the city's climate action plan? For example, building electrification requiring electric space and water heating and electric appliances in new construction, electric vehicle charging stations, and secure bicycle storage. Carrie.
All right, thank you, Allison. There's some really good comments about development and how it should proceed, and especially a lot of good climate and energy issues raised there. And I just say that the housing element is one of many parts of our general plan, and it works in concert with the other elements such as land use and urban design and conservation and sustainability elements. And while the housing element is focusing on needs and constraints of housing and includes program and policies to address those needs and reduce or eliminate the constraints, the housing element doesn't directly address the types of issues that are raised here. However, they are really important comments that I think that relate to important aspects of housing development that are addressed in other parts of the general plan and our zoning code. And these are comments that that we will hold on to for future consideration as we address those issues through zoning code and other general plan update issues. So, thank you.
All right, so the next two comments are also grouped together based on similar content. The first one is, will the housing element identify potential sites that are appropriately zoned for potential housing projects for homeless or those at risk of becoming homeless, transitional housing and permanent supportive housing? And then the next set of comments and questions were from one respondent, all kind of together. As part of this housing element workshop, I would like to hear what steps are being taken to plan for the provision of very low income housing to our homeless population and those at risk of homelessness as a result of the economic impacts of COVID-19. Our city was caught off guard by the Project Home Key offer of over $36 million to provide 70 units of transitional housing and 69 units of those at risk for homelessness. There is no question that the process was deeply flawed. The lack of participation by the city and residents in key aspects like location was disappointing and ultimately led to La Mesa's request to the county to withdraw the application. So we find ourselves no better off in meeting our very low housing needs. Let's learn from this experience and be prepared. Where is our inventory of potential sites? What about engaging with Affirmed Housing and other affordable housing developers to learn more about their process and the wraparound services they may bring to the table? There's no excuse for being caught off guard going forward. Our newly instituted homeless task force said it envisioned pursuing housing activities, including exploring state grants for permanent supportive housing programs like this one, and that it was looking forward to the city partnering with the county to build new or rehabilitate existing housing stock to create housing options for La Mesans experiencing or at risk of homelessness in La Mesa. So let's get to work and be prepared to take advantage of programs that may come our way. The COVID crisis is far from over, and there may yet be an opportunity to leverage CARES and other relief funding to make this happen. Carrie?
Thanks, Allison. The housing element, it sets the stage for the city to amend the zoning ordinance to allow transitional and supportive housing by right. And that's an action that has been, in the housing element, the city has not yet taken, but is something that we anticipate will be moving forward in the not too distant future. And, and then really, when we get down to the homeless issues and identifying sites for things such as the facility that was discussed, that's really more of a task that I would say is going to go towards the homeless task force and the staff that supports that task force, as well as eventually the city council. But in terms of other things that the city's doing that are, just to briefly touch on them, that are really outside of this housing element effort, the city is in the midst of setting up what we're calling the HOME program. And I apologize, but I've forgotten what that acronym means to us. It's new, so I don't remember all the words, but it's essentially a program to partner with a homeless services agency to work with folks in the street and build relationship with those folks and to move them towards transitional and supportive housing. And that's a program that our first phase is going to be supported by CDBG CV funds, which is CARES Act funding. And then a second portion will be supported by other grant funding that we're receiving from the state. So the city has taken action on those items. Not as much directly related to the housing element, but in other efforts, and will continue to do so.
Thank you. All right, the next question I'm going to direct to Veronica. And this question is, I'd like to see an updated plan that accommodates all building and shelter options and various facility types to benefit all ages, abilities, and income levels. Question, will there be other workshops?
Oh, well, one, we did cover that. May not be like a community workshop, but it will definitely be more meetings before the Planning Commission and City Council to discuss the housing element. One of the things that we have to remember is the housing element is a policy document. What we're doing in the housing element is just, like Carrie was mentioning, setting the stage. We are removing constraints. We are setting policies that would provide for housing. Specifically when it comes to shelter options and housing options for the homeless, for all income and all abilities, the city will be updating or amending its zoning ordinance. Terry mentioned transitional and supportive housing. There will be other types of amendments. The emergency shelters ordinance will be amended to make it more flexible based on new state law. There is also the low barrier navigation centers that the city will be providing provisions for. That is housing that for the homeless while they are waiting to be transitioned to permanent housing. So those are the new options that the city will be addressing as part of the housing element and the follow-up implementation.
Thank you. All right, Veronica, this is another question for you.
Okay.
How many, I think we've already touched on this, how many of each type of unit based on the county average medium income must La Mesa City add to its long-term housing stock and by what date?
Right.
For each income group, extremely low, 30% AMI, very low, 30 to 50% AMI, low and moderate and above.
Okay. Well, the 5 income categories for the housing element law is extremely low, 30%, AMI very low, 50%, low 80%, moderate income 120%, and above moderate income is whatever's above 120%. I think the question came in is referencing actually federal income limits, than not necessarily the state's income limits, and not relevant to the housing element to some extent. The overall regional housing needs allocation is 3,797 units. There is not a specific allocation for extremely low income. It's being subsumed under the very low income category. That one is 859. Low income is 487. Moderate income is 577. Above moderate income is 1,874. And this whole regional housing needs allocation is a little bit over 8 years, starting from June 30th, 2020 to April 15, 2029. The RHNA planning period is a little bit different from the housing element planning period, just to kind of add confusions to everybody. However, this planning period, this RHNA, again, like we mentioned before, is the city's planning goal. How much are you able to accommodate from a planning perspective? Production-wise, it's really largely dependent on the market. Are we heading towards a recession? Or there, like some people told us that we are already in a recession. So we'll see in terms of production, but to the extent that city would do is to encourage and facilitate housing by removing constraints, by providing capacity.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, as housing cost increases continue to outpace wage growth, what is La Mesa's plan to ensure housing that is affordable based on the 4 different categories that continues to meet the same definition of affordability as it does today? Carrie?
So it actually, I think this really kind of states the primary purpose of the housing element is to ensure that, you know, we can provide housing for all segments of the population, including affordability, and that we continue to apply those policies, you know, through the housing element period. And then when the time comes, we readjust, do what we're doing today, look at how that's gone over the past cycle, and look towards updating the housing element for the next cycle to ensure that same thing, that we are continuing to ensure that housing, that there continue to be housing, affordable housing choices available within the city, as well as for other segments of the population.
Thank you. So the next 2 questions that we received were similar. So I'm going to group them together for you, Carrie. What is La Mesa doing to ensure new housing and existing housing are used for long-term housing and not short-term rentals, which raise the cost of housing in communities, don't pay business hotel taxes, and place a burden on residents who live near them? And then the related question is, some cities ban or limit the allowance of Airbnbs because Airbnbs negatively impact the stock of affordable long-term housing. Cities like San Luis Obispo, Santa Monica, San Francisco, Las Vegas, New York City, Los Angeles, and many others implemented rules which ban Airbnbs or put restrictions such as requiring only full-time permanent residents may be hosts, etc. What is La Mesa doing to ensure La Mesa housing exists for long-term resident use?
Thank you, Allison. That's a great question. And, you know, short-term rentals have been an issue, and, you know, certainly we've heard about that in the news in the San Diego area over time. But in La Mesa, it does appear that the number of units that we may have appears to be really low. We really get very few nuisance complaints related to these types of uses. And we don't see a high number of listings online when we've done kind of research to look into this issue, because it is something we monitor. It's something that we want to be cognizant of. But at this point, we are just monitoring it, and based on the council direction that we've received to date, are not currently considering any rules to regulate, limit, or ban short-term rentals.
Okay, thank you. All right. So the next question is, how can La Mesa resident homeowners, how can La Mesa resident homeowners help the city of La Mesa meet the RHNA goals? So Veronica, would you like to tackle that?
Well, certainly, and I think we mentioned about ADUs or Ginia. There's another option called Ginia ADUs, which is crafting portions of your existing home in turning into a second unit. I think the ADUs is an important part of affordable housing strategy for many communities. It does offer additional rental housing in the community, but it also helps existing homeowners who can, you know, add another income source to their general income. That is important. But I think the other thing that we're going to have to ask homeowners is consider when there are affordable housing projects that are being brought in front of the community, and it adds the benefit of the community, the entire community, to show your support. I think that's important, to have the community come together and recognize there is housing need, particularly for income housing, and it cannot be done with. Not everybody can afford a single family home. So when apartments comes around, it really needs the support of the community to the, you know, before the city planning commission and city council. I think that's an important show of support for addressing housing needs in the community.
Thank you. Right. So the next question is, Ensenada City offers its residents pre-approved building plans which save residents thousands of dollars and shorten the time to build. Los Angeles and San Diego offer programs to provide benefits to residents who commit to adding housing which qualifies for RHNA numbers. What incentives, if any, are La Mesa residents receiving to encourage them to add to long-term housing stock in a way that can help La Mesa achieve its regional housing needs allocation goals? Carrie.
Well, thanks, Allison. In the city right now, we don't have any direct incentives. But what we do have is development standards and a fee structure in La Mesa that provide an environment that's conducive to housing development. The city's permitting fees are among the lowest in the county. We've adopted regulations for ADUs and JADUs in accordance with and at the pace of state changes to that law to ensure that we're providing as much flexibility and availability to homeowners to pursue that, both single family and multifamily homeowners to add ADUs to their properties. And we're also in the process of developing a guidebook that will assist homeowners, and particularly the smaller single family homeowners, through the process and provide guidance on all aspects of that process. As well as, we will, any of the plans that other jurisdictions provide through through their public websites, those are public domain, and we would gladly accept folks to put those plans onto city, plan paper stock that's appropriate for the city of La Mesa, and submit those to us. And knowing that they're previously reviewed and permitted under the building code, that will greatly facilitate moving the review of those types of units through. So again, while we don't have anything direct, I think we do a pretty good job of creating an environment that's conducive to housing development.
Thank you. Okay, there is a huge disparity in accumulated wealth, the wealth gap, which disproportionately impacts minorities, primarily due to lack of real property ownership, leaving people's housing security dependent on a rental market that outpaces wages. Is La Mesa City housing policy helping mitigate or growing the wealth gap? Carrie?
It's a very interesting question, and that gap is certainly a concern, and I think the issues related to those disparities are really broad. They're not just limited to the city or its housing policy. It's very, very broad beyond that, but not that the policy doesn't play some part in that. And I think to the extent that the housing element and the housing policies that it includes provide a balanced opportunity for all the economic and ethnic segments of the population, to that extent, the city's housing policy helps to mitigate the disparities as opposed to helping it grow. And I do think that part of the intent of the housing element is to provide opportunity for folks who maybe are on the bottom side of that gap to be sure that they do find opportunities to get housing and hopefully opportunities for real property ownership.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next question is, what is the City of La Mesa doing to ensure that additional building is done with consideration of safety issues from the fire and police traffic departments first, particularly in areas without sidewalks, hilly areas with limited ingress and egress options, in consideration of transportation of children to schools, and in consideration of need for handicapped parking for residents? Carrie?
So thanks, Allison. I think these are issues that relate to our development review process and the municipal code provisions that underlie that process. And we do have code provisions and supporting land use policies and other regulations that address each of these issues. As an example, the sidewalk master plan identifies areas in need of sidewalk. prioritizes those sidewalks for city CIP projects, and then also provides a pathway where private projects, as they go in, would have identified sidewalk improvements to do. So those are issues that we look at. And then another example would be, accessible parking is something that is always reviewed under the federal ADA law, as well as the Title 24 accessibility requirements of the state of California.
Thank you. All right. The next question is, as people increasingly purchase things online and brick and mortar stores continue to suffer and close, is the city considering rezoning some of the commercial areas to housing or mixed use? And if so, what is the anticipated impact on lost sales tax revenues and jobs as commercial brick and mortar facilities shut down? Carrie?
So at this point, we're not considering any rezoning. As Veronica had said, we've identified that we do have zoning capacity to meet our RHNA allocation. But we do have the mixed use overlay that applies to most commercial corridors, and even to typical commercial zoning actually provides for development of residential units without a limit on density. So we don't have a need to consider rezoning at this time in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is, will La Mesa City create access for residents to watch La Mesa's performance towards meeting La Mesa City RHNA commitments? Something like a resident accessible real-time chart with timeline, accomplishment, in process, and performance goals, date, and quantity. This provides definitive understanding of what is being done rather than always being told we need more affordable housing. Let's track what type we're short on and how it's being achieved. So the RHNA progress is reported annually to the state's Department of Housing and Community Development, and that data is published on their website, so it's an annual report. That said, we recognize that there's an interest in and a need for making this information available at the local level and in real time, and we are looking at ways to present it that way. So stay on the lookout for more to come. All right, so the next question is, will the housing element identify potential sites that are appropriately zoned for the development of affordable housing for very low and extremely low income families and senior citizens? Veronica, I'm going to direct that one to you.
Sure. As I mentioned before, a key component of the housing element is in fact identifying adequate sites with appropriate density and development standards for a variety of housing for all income groups. And in general, state law looks at affordability, aligns it for planning purposes based on density. So we're looking at zoning that's at least 30 units to the acre for facilitating lower income households, housing for lower income households, including very low and extremely low income. Certainly there are density bonus incentives that are specifically for affordable housing. That's one way to increase the feasibility of certain sites to provide housing for seniors and extremely low income households. But from a planning perspective, we do not prescribe a specific sites for a particular type of users. That would be like a fair housing issue. We are providing it based on density and whether it's appropriate for lower income households, but we do not specifically identify sites for seniors or for extremely low income households. It's just wherever it's supposed to go. Yeah. Carrie, you want to say something?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay,
No.
I thought that you raised your hands.
Just
Yeah, but yes, ultimately the housing element will have that full capacity disclosed how the city plans to meet its regional housing needs out.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Now, our last question that we had received in advance is as follows. According to 3-4-50, and I think that's a reference to a document called Chronic Disease in San Diego County, prepared by HHSA, which I think is the Health and Human Services Agency. 3 behaviors: poor nutrition, lack of physical exercise, and tobacco and substance use contribute to 4 chronic diseases. cancer, heart disease and stroke, type 2 diabetes, and respiratory conditions, which result in over 50% of deaths in San Diego County and over 55% of deaths in East Region. To reduce secondhand and thirdhand smoke, death, and disabilities, particularly among communities that disproportionately experience this death and disability, adopt and enforce a comprehensive smoke-free ordinance for multifamily housing properties, including exclusive use areas, both interior unit space and exterior areas such as private balconies and decks. Thank you for your consideration of these recommendations in the updates to the housing element of the La Mesa General Plan. Carrie?
Thanks, Allison. So in the not too distant past, the city went through an effort to update its no smoking ordinance. And at that time, all of the changes that were desired through the community and discussed at council, those changes were made and put into place. So at this time, I don't anticipate that there will be any revisiting of that issue. And just to be clear, the current no smoking ordinance does not address the issues in the way, the multifamily issues as is stated in the question. Okay.
Thank you.
And Carrie, unfortunately, once the webinar has launched, we are not able to revise the poll. So what I would suggest to the city, Holly, we will go back and convert the poll into a survey that the city can post online. And so we will be able to collect the information that we wanted to collect tonight, and in fact, it will be able to expand to people who are not able to attend the meeting tonight. So we'll just convert that into a little mini survey then.
Great, thank you, Veronica. So, full disclosure, we are newbies at this Zoom webinar thing here at the City of La Mesa. This is a new thing to us. So, one thing we didn't anticipate was the Q&A part. That I see we've got 11 comments. So, I'm going to start walking through those real quick, and I may ask Veronica or Allison to address some of the things that I see there, but I don't want to leave those comments unaddressed. So, I will just start with the first one, which is a comment from Patrick Dean. What can the city do to raise more money for the city's parks? Is the rate of park in lieu fee being addressed? I think if developers and builders are going to build affordable housing, then the rate should remain low. However, if they build in high-end houses, then our current rates are far too low. So park fees are kind of outside the focus of the housing element. That's a separate issue that we look at those fees pretty much every year in terms of looking at how they've been spent. But I think it's a comment that again, like a couple of the other comments that we got, that we will hold on to kind of carry forward as the park fees are looked at the next time to know that this is a comment that was out there from the public. So the next is Dawn, and I do believe that, and I'll just say, I'll read the question, but Veronica did address this one. Recent studies. What about recent studies that show that a previous bill by Senator Wiener required the State Department of Finance to double count some elements of the RHNA estimates? I've read that Senator Atkins plans to introduce legislation in the next session to correct those elements and an update to the current RHNA. Is the city looking into those issues, and do you plan to update your own housing needs assessment when the legislature corrects its RHNA numbers? And as per Veronica's previous response, that's not an issue that affects the San Diego region's RHNA allocations. So, and the next question is Wendy Mihalik. If San Diego really prioritizes housing opportunities, areas with better schools, less environmental hazards, and et cetera, then how do we ever overcome housing inequities? And I'd actually say that that's the point of San Diego's prioritization there is to overcome inequities, and that we whether the development is aimed, whatever economic level the development is aimed at, it needs to be near better schools and in areas that are not environmentally hazardous. That's the point of that. I don't think it's I think that's part of the inequities are the schools and the hazards, so that needs to be addressed as we go through that process. Also from Wendy, affordability is identified as one of the two largest problems. The current project pipeline presented tonight included 34 affordable units. What are we doing to get to the 430 in the fifth cycle? There are 859 in the sixth cycle. Veronica, would you mind addressing that one?
Let me take a look at it. I was trying to anticipate the other bit of questions, so I wasn't answering that question. Well, I think the city, what the city can do, the city cannot function as a developer, cannot function as a property owner. What the city can function as within its jurisdiction is to facilitate and encourage housing development by providing capacity and providing incentives and removing constraints. So whether we'll actually get to build 400 and something units in the affordable housing, or 859 units of affordable housing, that is definitely, the city will strive to do that through negotiation with developers, through pursuit of fundings and partnership with nonprofits, but it doesn't, the city doesn't have the ability to build 859 affordable units. As you mentioned before, it's expensive. There was $36 million that the city was available to build about 150 units of affordable for homeless. You can divide it and realize how much subsidy is required in order to facilitate lower income housing. So what the city would have the ability to do is to make sure that it doesn't constrain housing. It encourages the development of it. Would we reach actual production of 859? Most likely we would not. Virtually no jurisdiction in the state does, because it's so expensive and so competitive to get funding. I think the city is actually on a good path in a lot of the current projects. Each one includes some affordable units, and I think that's the route the city would have to do. And most jurisdictions are achieving a portion of its regional housing needs allocation goal by negotiations, by development agreements with incentives, but very few of them would be directly involved in producing affordable housing.
Thank you. So the next couple comments are from Bonnie Baranoff. And Bonnie, first off, thank you for informing me that HOME is the Homeless Outreach and Mobile Engagement Program. Thank you. And then in terms of the bill numbers,
and that was what I was trying to get at when I was trying to research online when you were asking the other question. But off the top of my head, I'm not able to get that, but we can provide the bill numbers later on after the meeting.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Bonnie, we'll follow up with you on that. Yeah. Wendy, again, Malik asks, are you considering the use of converted hotels, and how will you facilitate? You know, Wendy, I think that's something that's going to come up on a case-by-case basis as properties potentially are identified and become available. After the issue with the Holiday Inn, I think you'll see the city kind of looking, eyes open, trying to understand how we can facilitate those type of possibilities. At this point, really, the converted hotels is really being facilitated by Project HomeKey, and I'm not sure that that's going to last indefinitely. I'm sure that it won't, but certainly that is something that needs to be looked at as we look at addressing housing, transitional housing, supportive housing. So that I think and really it's something we'd have to take direction from the city council on. So from Jeff Clemenson, numbers of needed housing for 2021 to 29 were based on peak conditions, based on recession from 2013 to 21. We might be seeing something greater than the recession, so these numbers, especially low income needs, be adjusted. And Veronica, would you mind addressing that?
Sure. Unfortunately, no. The RENA will not be adjusted. There is once the RENA is allocated from the State Department of Finance and adopted by the state and approved by the state and adopted by your region, there is no avenue of adjustment. So that also relates to the discussions about or the questions about the two bills that have double counting issues. Even if there are some adjustments, it would only apply to regions that have not started the RENA process. But once it's, San Diego is the first region to do it. Once it's at the stage that we are at right now, there is no avenue for adjustments, unfortunately.
Thank you. It's also from Jeff. Right now, you said that 40% of La Mesans live in cost burden rental or mortgage conditions. How does that compare regionally or statewide? Holly, you presented those data. Do you have any information on what the statewide comparison
I looked
would
up the regional number, so San Diego County. When looking at owner and renter households, 42% of those households live in cost burden. So it's relatively similar in La Mesa, and actually a few other cities are similar as well. El Cajon is at 47%. Let's see. And then Escondido at 46%. So those are the numbers that I have. I do not know a statewide number, and that would take a little bit more research or calculations, but we can also provide that.
Okay. Thank you, Holly.
Yeah.
So also from Jeff, what zoning changes might be looked at to promote changing over older or blighted properties into housing or other incentives? And I think there, I don't think, as I mentioned earlier, we're not anticipating any zoning changes. Even mostly the blighted properties that we see, or properties that aren't doing so good. Even in commercial corridors, there's some ability to provide housing on those properties based on current zoning. So I think the primary thing that we can do is to continue to work with property owners and developers to bring them together and bring a housing developer into connection with a property owner whose property might need some help. And see what we can get done. And I think I don't anticipate that you're going to see incentives, arising from the city of La Mesa. But the other thing that we will do, and that we do currently, is when we do see affordable housing projects, we work with those folks to help identify potential grant funding and things like that can move those projects along. So I think that's the primary thing that we'll be doing in those areas as opposed to zoning changes. And then as far as the URL for the poll, we will do that, Jeff. Thank you. We will get that out to you long before we have that together. So our next question is from Aaron Ammerling. And I will say that it is 7:08. We're scheduled till 7:30. My thought is we'll probably just keep going through questions until we get to about 7:25, and then we'll wrap up, and we'll have to see what remaining questions we have and how we move on from there. So Aaron Ammerling asked, what is the city doing to provide affordable housing, not by building? For example, in the Bay Area, housing costs have gone down by 35%. Because of more remote working. I'm not 100% sure what the question is getting at. I know in the Bay Area they've had a huge change in how office space, which was a dominant development for them in downtown, is utilized, and companies that are very large there have moved towards we're not going back to our offices type of policies. So I don't think that the same thing is true in La Mesa. I don't think we've seen the same kind of exodus to remote working, though we have certainly seen it. But I think generally we're doing the things they're implementing the housing element. We're going through this process right now. We're identifying potential sites and policies to further affordable housing and mitigate and eliminate constraints. So I think that's really the answer to that. Veronica, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think there are so many speculations as to how COVID would impact development over time, and I've heard different theories. You know, there are more theories about there will be more suburban housing because people now don't have to live where they're close to where they work. But then there is also like the other way around as well. But then that means that housing is going to be more expensive in the suburban area. So I think we are at a too early of a trend to look at exactly what the impacts are going to be at different types on different types of market. We do know that, you know, some of the retails and offices are not coming back, and that is almost, I guess, certain, and therefore converting some of the non-residential uses into residential uses is probably going to be a trend. But exactly how that's going to impact housing costs region-wise, I think we're not at the point where we can really predict that.
Thank you, Veronica. So our next question is from Kathleen Brand. Why don't you mandate affordable units in all multifamily residential developments? Make the developer pay a fee to not put in affordable units, then use that money for an incentive for more affordable units to developers. So that essentially sounds like an inclusionary housing policy with an in lieu fee. And that's, that is a tool that's used by many jurisdictions. It's not something that that staff has been directed to do or pursue here in La Mesa. So it's something that certainly staff, if we're directed to do so, would look into that and provide whatever information back to the city council that they requested in that area, but have not been directed to do so at this point. So another question from Aaron Ammerling. What is the city going to do to ensure transition between higher density areas and single family areas so you don't have a 4-story building up against a 1-story house? So generally, Aaron, this is a development standard type issue. Relates to there are some extra setbacks from when a property is adjacent to certain zoning and there's single family zoning next door. And there's also design standards that speak to that. So those are the primary tools that we have to look at that issue. And so we have
question, the beginning is 2 down. So you want to
yes,
start.
thank you. I had noticed that. Holly.
I wanted you to.
That. Thank you. So the next question is from Anne-Marie Piccone-Snyder, and it's regarding policy HE 3.1.2, which reads, encourage the development of housing for seniors and persons with disabilities by offering density bonuses and other zoning incentives such as reduced parking requirements, and encourage such housing to be located within close proximity to community facilities and transportation services. And it doesn't appear that youth are specifically listed along with seniors and persons with disabilities in this policy. Youth often enter homelessness without vehicles, but because they are early on in the continuum of homelessness, many youth progress quickly to independent housing. Is there housing consideration for adding youth with seniors and persons with disabilities? And Veronica, would you be able to address that one?
I think actually if persons with disability does include youth. So if you when you see the housing element, you will see that we do look at disabilities from different age groups. But a lot of the disabled persons, from a youth perspective, they are living from home. Of course, from a homeless perspective, though, we do also look at homeless youth, runaway youth that are potentially aging out of the foster system. So they are covered, but they're not specifically identified under state housing element law. But in the housing element, we do cover youth. So, and there is a new density bonus for colleges to provide student housing if the student housing does, I think, provide housing for youth who are considered homeless. So there are some new provisions under state law, certainly, that would cover youth as well.
Thank you, Veronica. So our next question from it's more of a statement really from Kathleen Brand and a request. City needs to have on their website a simple explanation of what the affordable levels mean. 30% AMI are people making minimum wage. Many people think that affordable housing is for those people, those in all caps. 80% AMI is someone making $60,000 plus or minus a year. And I think this is a good point, Kathleen. I think this is something that that we could do. And as we work,
it will be in the housing element.
Yeah.
That information will be in the housing element.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you. And I think it's something too, we can put something up on the web that helps folks understand that in a general sense for the housing element and for as we deal with affordable housing projects through our Affordable Homes Bonus Program and other things like that. So thank you for that, Kathleen. Also from Kathleen Brand, TOD should not be within 1/2 mile of a trolley stop or a transit stop. It should be measured by contiguous sidewalks. I appreciate that comment, Kathleen. At this point, we basically follow regional guidance as to what is TOD. And in the Sandag region, that's essentially considered 1/2 mile of a trolley stop or transit stop. And they use a radius. I think you make a good point about contiguous sidewalks, and there are certain places that a radius doesn't work. And I think that's something that we will, a comment we will hold on to for future consideration as we address those issues here in La Mesa. Anna Marie Piccone Snyder says, thank you for this informative presentation. And on behalf of the panel, I will say you're very welcome. Glad to have provided it. Thank you for participating. So from Kathleen Brand, Holiday Inn project was mishandled by the city. As stated in the city council meeting, the city manager was informed of the grant application by the county, but dropped the ball and not assigning to staff member to coordinate. This fiasco is on the city. Thank you for your comment, but I really don't see anything for me or us to respond to there. Also from Kathleen Brand, what measures are the city moving forward with to allow churches to build housing on their parking lots? And at this point, we're not moving forward with any such provisions. There has been an effort at the state level.
That bill has been signed by the governor.
Thank you, Veronica. So basically, that's what I was thinking that had been signed. I wasn't sure yet if it had been.
Yeah, it has been signed by the governor. Yeah. Great.
Thank you. And so that's something we'll be evaluating on what the city needs to do to comply with those rules. So then another question from Anna Marie Piccone Snyder, and that is regarding policy HE 1.1.3, which is utilize neighborhood revitalization strategies to focus financial resources and efforts in improving targeted neighborhoods. How will the Mesa determine which neighborhoods will be targeted? So essentially, Anna Marie, when we look at those type of strategies, and if we essentially would be likely working with some level of affordable housing partner in doing those type of efforts. And what we would do is utilize the demographic resources that we have available to ensure that we are working in neighborhoods that are less economically advantaged and or have other disadvantages that are identified through the various surveys and things that we can use to identify that information. So that's essentially what we'd be doing. From Diane Osterling, can La Mesa work with developers to require more than 10% of builds be for affordable housing? Aren't they making money? It's like, I'm sure that developers, as most of us who have jobs do, we make money at a job, and that's what developers do to make their money. In terms of requiring more than 10% of it be for affordable housing, we currently don't have any requirement that projects include any level of affordable housing. It's only when folks utilize the Affordable Homes Bonus Program and the density bonus provisions of the state that that type of percentage comes in. And kind of going back to the previous question, which kind of spoke to an inclusionary housing policy, which this would be, include so many or provide a fee if you don't include so many. That's not something that's being pursued at this time by the city. Comment from Kathleen Brand: city cannot develop on grants alone. Sidewalk, parks, bike infrastructure are needed with these developments, and the city is not keeping up. Thank you for the comment. Appreciate that. Another comment from Diane Osterling: while the Mesa permit fees may be low compared to other municipalities, they considered that providing some waiver or discounted fees to residents and or pre-approved plan type issues, as these provide residents incentive to build and likely cost the city less than incentives they provide to outside large builders. Well, I think I would start off by saying I'm not aware of any incentives that the city provides to outside large builders other than the incentives and concessions and waivers and reductions that the city is obligated to provide when someone proposes a project under the density bonus law. In terms of waivers or discounted fees to residents and pre-approved plans, it's actually, those are things we have considered and are continuing to consider. And we'll, as we develop the ADU guidebook that I mentioned earlier, we'll continue to consider and look at ways that we can encourage and incentivize folks to build ADUs, and continue to work with developers to try to incentivize and encourage the development of affordable units in larger housing developments. Okay, so Kathleen has a comment about not just in the housing element on the website. And yes, Kathleen, I think you're referring to the income levels. And I agree with you that I think we can provide something like that. And I think it would be good for us to as well. And I appreciate the way you presented it, to not only say this is the amount of money that means, but also to kind of maybe provide something that the typical a person who might be in that category, I would say, be a server in a restaurant, an attendant at a convenience store, basically to provide that kind of clarity as to who might be in those income levels. So I think that's a great idea. Then Kathleen, if there are gaps in continuous sidewalks of a TOD, then make developer build the gaps. And generally that is actually something that along the project frontage, that's actually something we require on a regular basis. Not necessarily, we don't necessarily have the ability through the kind of constraints we have on legal constraints we have on what we can ask of a developer. We often can't have that extend beyond the site, but certainly we look at improving sidewalk on the site to ensure that it's complete and up to current standards. Then the last comment is from Kathleen Brand. The city is providing incentives by not charging enough in fees to truly cover the cost on the public infrastructure that these developments create. We need development impact fees. And again, Kathleen, thank you for your comment. And that's a comment that we will hold on to and utilize at the appropriate time when we're talking about development impact fees. So,
Thank you for tackling those, Gary.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I want to be sure that we did our best to try to address all of the questions that we were getting from folks. And even though we didn't anticipate the Q&A, I'm glad that we did get some questions. So with that, I think we're ready to wrap up. So I just kind of wanted to, if we could bring the presentation back up, because it does have our email on at the end. So we could look at, have that up. But just again, anticipating next steps, we're going to, continue to gather information and comments through our email, which we'll have up on the screen here in a second. So if you have any further comments or questions that you'd like to present to us, you can do that by sending email to planning@cityoflamesa.us. It's up there on your screen. And we'd be glad to hear any more comments that we may get or questions. And really thank you all for participating this evening. We just got one last question. Will this be available online for those who couldn't watch tonight? And this is something that we recorded. And so I anticipate it is something that we will be able to make available online, as well as some of the other resources that we discussed this evening. And Kathleen, I will note that you did provide the comment that Little Flower Haven did not provide all the necessary curb ramps at the intersections. Thank you for that comment. So with that, is there any other closing comments from our panel?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone who contributed and attended tonight. It was really appreciative that it was a lively and engaging discussion.
Great. Well, I really want to thank Veronica Tam and Holly Anderson of Veronica Tam Associates for putting together this webinar and helping the city with updating their housing element. And also really thank you very much to all of you who attended. I really appreciate the time you took to attend and listen to our presentation and to provide the questions that you've provided. So with that, I will bid you all good evening and thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your night.